Hey, question for you all. If James Hetfield from Metallica were to officiate the wedding between Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy, would he be the pastor of Muppets? Hey kids, Adam here, and today we are going to fix your bloody snare. Hang on a second. Hello? That that's not what that means? Are you sure? Okay, thank you. Bye. So that was my British friend. He says that's not what that means. What I'm talking about is when you have a snare drum track for a real kit and you have all sorts of bleed from the cymbals and especially the hi-hat. This hi-hat sitting right next to the snare drum and it's just it's blasting away in your track. Apparently that's not called the bloody snare, but I kind of like that, so I may go with it. Today we're going to try to fix that. I'm going to show you 4 different methods, some plugins, some built-in stuff in a Reaper, and something you already have no matter what DAW you have to try to eliminate all of the bleed from your snare drum track. Let's head over to Reaper and take a look. All right, here we are in Reaper. I have 3 different snare tracks taken from 3 different songs, 3 different drummers, 3 different genres, 3 different timelines. The first one is my band Underground Hive. This is the song Rumors. I'll put a card up to that. And just take a listen to the snare drum as it is. And this is just the raw track, no processing. You hear a lot of hi-hat. It almost sounds like an overhead track. In fact, this other snare over here is for the song Information that I just did a mix breakdown. I'll put a card up here for that one. Listen to this one. This is even worse. That almost sounds like an overhead track. And in the mix, that can be really, really, really tough. Let me go back to the Rumors one. And when you listen to this, I'm going to put some, just bring up ReaComp and put some compression on here. When you compress something like this, all the hi-hat and things are going to come through. So listen. And you can't have that. Part of the problem, the biggest problem for me is the hi-hats coming through and it's not being processed and equalized the same as the snare drum. There's some harsh frequencies that the hi-hat has that stick out when you process the snare. The other issue is that the hi-hat now comes through the middle channel. So let's say overheads are 100% pan left and right. Your hi-hat should be coming mostly out of the, well, whatever side you're choosing. But right now it's going to come right up the middle through the snare drum track and the volume is going to be processed on the snare track. So we want to get rid of as much hi-hat bleed as possible. There's 2 third-party plugins. There's one Reaper plugin I want to show you, and I want to show you like kind of a cool different way to do it. Let's take a look at the easiest one that I found first. I'm going to kind of lead off with this rather than the Reaper plugin. This is a plugin called Debleeder by Wilkinson Audio. It is specifically meant for reducing bleed in drums, especially things like the cymbals and the hi-hat. Let me just turn this off and on for you in this track. The reason I like this plugin so much is because it knows the frequencies of the snare and it can pinpoint those, and it will actually help things like ghost notes come through. So if you take this and zoom in really far, and I play just this without the bleeder on it, you hear the hi-hat stepping over that ghost note. I'll turn debleeder on here. It's still in there, but it's much less, and you're getting that kind of ghost note on the snare to kind of shine through. So that's one way to do it. So built into Reaper is ReaGate, and let's try looking at that as our second plugin. And what I like to do is just kind of play it and then mess with the settings as I go. So the first thing I'm going to do is the threshold here on the left side. I'm going to bring that up until the snare starts to, until everything goes away and the snare pops through. And then I need to adjust some attack and release times and things like that to bring it really through. It's not bad, but if you listen to the sound of just the snare itself when I turn this off, you'll see why this is an issue for me. And now the gate on. It loses some of that sharpness to the attack. And granted, we can kind of add some of that back through with compression, but it really kind of loses that. A lot of settings you can tweak in this. There's this hysteresis and there's RMS size that you can kind of help. But for me, I like the depleter more than ReaGate. And since it's only $30, it's over Wilkinson Audio. I'll put a link in the description to it, so take a look at that plugin. But ReaGate will work in a pinch, and it actually does work in certain cases. Like toms, ReaGate works really well because most of the time in toms you're having a really solid hit. You don't have ghost notes on toms, things like that. For me, ReaGate doesn't allow the ghost note to come through as much. Let's look at the track information. I also use the depleter plugin on this one. We'll do some before and after. It's pretty good. It does a really good job of that. The next one I want to look at here is there is a gate plugin by AIX DSP called Multibandgate. And this one is pretty interesting because it has a look ahead feature. You can drag the threshold down based on the waveform, and it has separate bands for everything. So if I just play this along here, does a really good job. Just the default setting, just changing the threshold. But then what you can do is you can adjust all the different frequencies to your liking. You can bring more bass in, you can bring less highs in. I'll kind of just play around with that. I really like the sound just default without changing anything, but take a listen. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. You can take out, what I was doing there is I was adjusting like the Hive crossover. You can push that way up and then bring the threshold down, and you can either get rid of or add a lot of the highs in there. Let's take a last look at my good friend Mike from Let's Talk About Reaper. His channel is up here. You guys should know who he is by now. He sent me over a track of his snare. Let's take a listen to this. Mike, really appreciate you letting me borrow your snare track, and let's take a look at this. So this method is essentially using a compressor to as a gate. And I originally saw this on one of Warren Hewert's videos from Producer Like a Pro. He saw it on Manny Nieto's. It was one of his things that he does. So the first thing you do is you right click and you duplicate tracks. If you have effects already on here, compression, EQ, sends and things, that'll make sure those duplicate over. And then on the we'll mute out the first one, we'll solo out just the duplicate. And I'm going to name this duplicate just so I don't get mixed up here. You want to flip the phase on it. So you're going to start with something like this, which is just twice as loud. When you flip the phase, it completely nulls itself out. That's because it's a complete 180 inverse of the waveform. So we're going to solo out the duplicate. I'm going to put ReaComp on it. I'm going to choose kind of a standard setting, kind of a medium-ish attack. 17's fine, 200 some. Release is fine. I'm going to put the ratio all the way up to 12:1. I'm going to bring this and compress it very heavily. And now let's bring in the other track. Check that out. Let me mess with the attack and release a little bit. You get a little bit of the hi-hat wash in there, which is fine because you're not it's not like it's completely overpowering. What this is essentially doing is you are putting a compressor on the reverse track. So every time it hits, it's then changing the polarity to essentially nothing, and the first track then allows it to come in. You can do this on all sorts of stuff. Warren's video, he did on snare and he did it on toms. I imagine it would work the same way on kick. And let's go over to that first track again, and we'll try this because now we'll see if it sounds any better. And I'm going to actually use the version with the compressor on it. So if you listen to this, this is just bad. That hi-hat just like cranks through there. So let's duplicate this track. We're going to flip the polarity on the second one. I'll just copy over the same ReaComp that I have on the one that I did on Mike's snare. And we'll pull that up and just kind of play it. Let's see what happens here. I think that's pretty good. I've messed with this in the past and haven't really had that much success with it. But I think this actually sounds as good as the debleeder or the AIX DSP multibandgate or ReaGate itself. I think it's much easier to use than ReaGate because even though they're the same types of settings, I think this reverse polarity really works well. I think what I'm going to do for my next mix is I'm going to try this method first and see where I get. Now, obviously, your best chance to reduce hi-hat bleed is to do it in the recording process. But as you guys know, if you've recorded live drums, there's no way to get cymbals completely out of your snare drum. There are some like weird things you can do with towels and foam, and there's like the hi-hat. There's this little contraption you can put on, on the hi-hat and snare and try to reduce it that way. But most everyone is doing some sort of gate in their their snare drum to get rid of the bleed. So I'm going to try this on my next mix. I'll let you guys know how it goes. All right, so that's it for this video. Let me know ways that you get rid of cymbal bleed in your snare drum. Do you just avoid it altogether and use a sampler replacement? I think that's a big reason why people started using sampler replacements, is because a lot of the bleed from the other drums. And I think it's probably a mistake because I think you're losing a lot of the original performance. Now, we're not losing the performance here because the overheads are still going to cover all those cymbals and the hi-hat and everything like that. And even some recordings have dedicated hi-hat mics. But with this, you can really get that out of your snare track. Like I said, I think I'm going to start using the duplicate reverse polarity compression Warren Hewitt Manietto trick. I gotta find up a better name for that, but I think that's what I'm gonna end up using from now on. So like, comment, subscribe, do the whole YouTube hokey pokey thing, and until next time, have yourselves an amazing week. That was a hot mess.